What are you afraid of? Scientific studies tell us that every one of us is only born with two innate fears. The fear of loud noises and the fear of falling, aka the fear of heights. Now, I've been in rock bands ever since I was a teenager, so I've been able to overcome that fear of loud noises kind of thing. But let me just confess to you, I am terrified of heights. Not a fan of heights. I like to look at a mountain. I don't want to climb that mountain. I can enjoy the architecture of a skyscraper, but I don't like being on the top floor. In fact, the last time I was in New York City, I went to the top floor of the Empire State Building, nearly lost my lunch on that one. I think whoever invented bungee jumping must have been on something that day. Craziest event, and only second to skydiving. So if you're a fan of skydiving, my hat is off to you. I am afraid of heights, terrified of. Now, one thing that I love is documentaries. And I can watch a documentary about heights. In fact, our worship leader, Ian, posted about this documentary called Free Solo. And if you don't know that film, it follows this guy. His name's Alex Honnold. He is a free climber. And it follows him on this journey to be the first person ever to climb El Capitan without any ropes. Now, El Capitan is a 7,500-foot high cliff face in Yosemite Park. Did I mention he wanted to do it without any ropes? If you haven't seen it, it's an incredible documentary. And throughout the entire film, Alex is battling the reality of the situation, right? You fall, you die. His girlfriend is terrified. His coaches are afraid. Even the ones that are making the film at one point want to quit because they don't want to see their friend fall to his demise. Everybody was afraid, except Alex. Alex was confident, probably a little crazy. If you want to watch it, just be forewarned, it is incredibly intense. Confidence. It's what eats fear for breakfast. Now, I am no Alex Honnold. While I may be afraid of heights, here's the deal. I am not at all afraid of open water. It's actually listed on one of the top 10 fears, open bodies of water. I grew up in Florida, so I grew up water skiing and fishing and deep sea diving. I grew up around the beaches, the oceans, even lakes. One time, my brother and we swam across Crystal Lake at 12 and 9 years old, only using paddle boards. We're not afraid of water. I read in an article, the key to overcoming any fear is continued exposure to that fear. You might want to write that down. The key to overcoming any fear is continued exposure. So I figured, what if I combine my love of water with my fear of heights? There was a decade stretch where every year during September, I would go out to Page, Arizona, and lead worship at my uncle, his church, and we would do some youth group events. And always on our day off, we would head out to Lake Powell. Beautiful lake in northern Arizona. And this is at a time where cliff diving was still legal. It's not legal anymore. 65-foot cliffs, I'm afraid of that. But crystal clear water below, okay, maybe we can do this. And ever since I tried cliff diving 10 years ago, I love it. I love jumping off of bridges, off of rock faces, as long as I'm jumping into water. So there is my confession. If you wanted to know a little bit more about my world, I'm afraid of heights. So what are you afraid of? Every single one of us has a fear of some sort. Sometimes it's public speaking. Sometimes it's a fear of failure, spiders, the fear of being known. And whatever fear it is that you may be carrying today, I want you to know that there's a confidence that can be found. There's a confidence rooted in the character of God that I'm going to talk about today, and I believe it is a secret way of overcoming any fear. So as we continue Made New, lean in this morning if you're afraid of something. This has been an awesome series. It's been amazing for me to be able to hear some of your testimonies coming out of this. If you have a testimony that you want to share, I encourage you to go to bridgesnashville.com/story and share your testimony. Testimony is how we overcome the enemy. It says in Revelation that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb. That's what Jesus did for us. And the word of our testimony, that's what we give back to him. So share your story. This has been and if you've missed any part of the series, you can catch up on our Bridges Nashville podcast. We've been looking at the thought patterns in our lives that hold us back from stepping into that full life that Jesus has for us. We kicked off week 1, and we talked about transformation through the renewing of our minds by saying yes to more of the Spirit and no to the flesh. Week 2, we talked about having a fresh perspective, looking at the world through the lens of gratitude. Seeing everything as a blessing will completely renovate your life. Then we talked about breaking anxiety in week 3 by looking at the ways of Jesus specifically and how he lived a life of prayer, community, and rest. And last week, Pastor Caleb shared with us that depending on how big your view is of God will determine how you see his power and movement in your life as he came through the book of John with the different miracles. Next week, Jamia is going to wrap up this series. Trust me, you're going to want to be back here next week. It's going to be a powerful word. But today, we are diving into confidence. Not just any confidence. If I was to title the message today, it would be called A Holy Confidence. If you have your Bible or smartphone, let's be honest, everybody does. You can go ahead and go over to Proverbs 14, verse 26, we're going to get there in just a moment. We've also got all of the scriptures preloaded on the YouVersion app. If you go to the events tab, click on Bridges Nashville, you'll find them there. In his book, Rhinoceros Success, author Scott Alexander tells us that every rhino possesses 2 key characteristics. They have 2-inch thick skin, and they wake up every morning ready to charge. That is confidence. Thick skin. Okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. Thick skin means you don't get easily offended. Thick skin means that you're not swayed by public opinion. It also means that when God tells you to do something, you've got to do it. Stand firm and don't be swayed back. I think many of us live our lives trying to please too many people. You will please people or you will please man. You will offend people or you will offend man. Choose wisely. Because if you try to be everything to everyone, you'll end up being nothing to no one. And I tell you this, the people who changed history were very rarely the most popular person in the room, Jesus included. See, leaders make the decision that no one else wants to make. The voice of God has got to be your guiding compass. And then when the Lord speaks, you've got to move. You cannot be afraid of what people will think when you act, when it's based on the voice of the Lord. And inaction is an action. I believe it was Michael Jordan who said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. See, we can be overcome by a fear of people. But as it pertains to confidence and how we find confidence, there's only one type of fear that's actually a healthy fear. That's right. There's one type of fear that I want to encourage you to get if you don't already have it this morning, and here's what it's called. The fear of the Lord. Proverbs 14:26 says this, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. Can we flash that up on the screens? Proverbs 14:26, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. Now, when I say fear of the Lord right here, I'm not talking about being afraid of God. No, I'm talking about a reverence, an awe, a wonder. Listen, God is holy. He's righteous. He's perfect. There is nothing or no one that compares to him. He's worthy of all the glory, the praise, and the honor. That's the type of fear we're talking about today. It's interesting, the word for confidence in this particular proverb is this Hebrew word mibtach. And it actually translates into the art of confiding. I've never thought about that before this week, but confidence and confiding in someone or something are very closely related. So when it comes to this fear of the Lord, when you confide in somebody, are you afraid of that person? No. But you trust that person because you know that they have your best interests at heart. Trust and confidence, closely related. This is where we get the phrase, I'm going to tell you something, but it's in confidence. Because you trust who you're telling to not blab, right? Or when you sign a confidentiality agreement, you're saying, hey, you can trust me with this information. I'm not going to go run off and tell it. Trust is confidence. So if you're here this morning and you have maybe a low level of confidence, it's okay to admit that. My question would be, who are you confiding in? Who has your ultimate trust? Isaiah 30, verse 15. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel says, only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength, but you would have none of it. Now, I've met some confident people, but I wouldn't always say they were quiet. In quiet and confidence. Now, the other translations in the Bible, various translations, will actually substitute the word confidence here for the word trust. And we find strength when we trust in the Lord. See, a fear of the Lord is trusting in his plans and his purposes and in his goodness. When you fear the Lord, you don't have to fear anything else. When you fear the Lord, you don't have to fear anything else. So I want to share a story from the Bible this morning. It's about three kings. I know we just came out of Christmas. It's not about those three kings, not the ones who brought Jesus some cool gifts in the manger. This is about three other kings. In fact, this is a story about the three very first kings of Israel. And this will tell you a powerful story of humanity, especially as it pertains to our confidence and a fear of the Lord. So let me set a little bit of context before we dive into the scriptures, okay? The Israelites had been around for many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of years at this point in the Old Testament, and they never had a king. That wasn't God's particular plan for Israel. He was their God. He was their king. He was their source of inspiration. But as time went on and the Israelites made friends with other nations, they began to see that all of these other countries have kings. I want to be like them. And so they desperately pleaded with the prophets, give us a king. Quick lesson here. Comparison kills confidence. When you see what everybody else has and you start to want that instead of what God has for you and what he's called you to, that leads down a dangerous path and you will miss your calling and your purpose in that particular season. Nevertheless, God says, okay, I'll give you a king. And it starts out pretty good. First king in Israel's history is this guy named Saul. Saul was very tall. The Bible tells us he was actually a head taller than anybody else. He kind of stood out. He was handsome. He was smart. He comes from a good family line. But as Saul kind of steps into this first position as king, he gets a little arrogant over time. His pride starts to get the best of him. And he begins to trust in himself more than he does in God. He does what he wants, when he wants, and how he wants to do it. And that's called self-confident. Self-confident. See, pride and vanity are the name of that game. Saul got jealous anytime another warrior got any praise on the battlefield because he wanted all the glory to himself. And in 1 Samuel chapter 13, everything comes to a head. As Saul marches his army out to the battle lines, and what he's supposed to do is wait for the prophet to come and offer the sacrifice, and then they get to move into battle. But that's not what happens. Look at verse 8. Saul waited there 7 days for Samuel, as Samuel had instructed him earlier, but Samuel didn't come. Saul realized that his troops were rapidly slipping away, so he demanded, bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And Saul sacrificed the burnt offering himself. Just as Saul was finishing with the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. Perfect timing, right? As Saul went out to meet and welcome him, but Samuel said, what is this you have done? Saul replied, I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would. And the Philistines are at Michmash ready for battle. So I said, the Philistines are ready to march against us at Gilgal, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help. Oh, man, he sounds like he's playing the victim here. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering myself before you came. How foolish, Samuel exclaimed. And what happens next changes the course of his family, other families, and the entire nation. Listen to this. You have not kept the command the Lord gave you. Had you kept it, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom must end. For the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command. Wow. So in this moment, a kingdom is stripped from Saul, and it's about to be given to somebody else. Enter king number 2. His name's David. You've probably heard of him. Great songwriter, cool dude. And God says to himself, look, I need to find somebody that has some integrity because if there's going to be a king over Israel, at least I'm going to make it a king that I can trust. So David comes onto the scene. We know how he comes onto the scene. He's a shepherd boy turned hero by slaying a giant. And if you want to know what kind of leader David was, you got to look at one verse, Psalm 78, verse 72. This will tell you everything you need to know about David. And a side note, David didn't write it. This guy Asaph wrote it. He was another songwriter. Here's what he said. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands he led them. Whew, that could be a message all of itself. These two things, David had integrity of heart and skillful hands. Listen, David messed up. He messed up big time. But it was that integrity of heart that drove him back to the Lord in repentance. And God saw that humility and blessed him. What did he bless him with? Skillful hands. Those were hands that wrote songs, slayed giants, won battles, led a nation to prosperity and victory. So David is kind of rolling in a good time right here. He wins some battles. He kind of leads Israel into this time of a little bit of peace, and he kind of enjoys the fruits of his labor. They build up some cool buildings. He's loving life. He has several wives, different culture back then, but he has a lot of children. And some of his children follow in his ways. Most do not. And one of those sons that didn't follow in his ways was a guy named Absalom. Absalom was another handsome dude. All these guys are handsome in the Bible, apparently. And it makes a point of telling you that. But Absalom sets himself up as a judge. As people are coming into the city to bring their problems and requests to David, Absalom kind of posts himself outside of the king's courts, and he says, come to me, I'll help you out. And so he starts to set himself up in leadership. Danger number one. Sets himself up in leadership, and he was hard after the throne. Here's what it says in 2 Samuel 15. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people. And Absalom gets around a few guys, and they start to whisper into his ears. Gets around the wrong crowd, and conspiracy starts to break out. David gets word of this conspiracy, and he says to himself, look, I don't want any more bloodshed in my family. I'm headed out of here. He can have the throne. So David moves out, and Absalom moves in, king number 3. And after a little time, David is just chilling outside of the city, not really doing much, and his guys get a hold of him and they say, bro, what are you thinking? You just gave the kingdom to your son, and he is not righteous. You've got to go back to your rightful place and take the throne. So David says, okay, but I'm not going to go to battle with my own family. You guys can do it. So he lets his men go out. Of course, they kill Absalom and his army, and David goes back to the throne. Wow, you can't tell me the Bible is boring. It is an action-packed book. These are the first 3 kings of Israel. Now, the way that they all found confidence was in different places. Saul, king number 1, he found confidence in himself, pride and vanity, because his identity was wrapped up in a position of power. See, Saul didn't want to lose face with his men in the army, and so he gave a sacrifice even when it was unauthorized, and it cost him the kingdom. Pride always comes before a fall. Jesus warns about this, Matthew 23:12. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Saul put himself into that position. God quickly humbled him. David was a man of humility, and so God promoted him. If you live with pride, you're going to have a dangerous fall. Funny story, when cybersecurity started becoming something that everybody wanted, Todd Davis, the CEO of LifeLock, he was so confident in his company that he posted his social security on all of their advertisements, billboards, and in magazines. So confident. And unfortunately, he's been the victim of identity theft at least 13 times, according to the New Phoenix Times. That's a hard lesson to learn. You cannot be overconfident, right? Now, Absalom, on the tail end of these 3 kings, he found his identity and confidence in popular opinion. He was caught up with the wrong crowd, got into a conspiracy theory against his own dad, and he let voices that didn't have his best interest at heart misguide him. He listened to people who told him to take the kingdom. See, Paul writes about these kind of warnings in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 15:33, Paul says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. See, Absalom had gotten to this point where he craved the shouts of the audience more than the whisper of the Spirit. Be careful if you crave the shouts of the audience more than the whisper of the Spirit, because that's when you start letting the wrong voices in. When I was a freshman at Virginia Tech, I got to see Michael Vick play his last year of college football before he went into the NFL as the #1 draft pick. There's a brand new ESPN documentary that released this week. It's called Vick. And if you like football, I would give it a watch. The documentary tells the story, the rise and fall of his career, one of the most interesting careers in the NFL. And it tells us that when Michael started getting around the wrong people, he started making the wrong decisions. And it led to a sad demise. Let me ask you this morning, whose voice carries weight in your life? Whose words are heavy in your ears? Because community plays a huge role in finding your confidence. When you surround yourself with people you can confide in, you'll have a confidence that's rooted in the fear of the Lord. Because those people always have his voice leading them when they're true people that you can confide in. See, David is the only king here who found his security, his worth, his affirmation, and his confidence in God alone. He wasn't worried about position. He wasn't worried about the timing of getting to that position. And he definitely wasn't worried about the opinion of man. This is interesting. David never sought the throne. And he didn't try to hold on to it when his own flesh and blood wanted to be king. Even after being anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the next king of Israel, David spends 15 chapters on the run. He had many opportunities to actually take matters into his own hands and kill Saul to become the king. His men urged him to do it, but David didn't want to get to the right place by taking the wrong road. He didn't want to get to the promised land and end up having to go 40 years in the desert. There were 4 particular people in David's life, several others, but these 4 really stand out in the story of David. These guys carried a lot of weight in his life, and they were all godly men. The first one is Jesse, his dad. The second is Jonathan, his best friend. And number 3 and 4 are prophets of the Lord, Samuel and Nathan. See, the right type of community will instill confidence. This is actually what encouragement is. We know the 61 one another phrases in the New Testament. Encourage one another is one of those phrases. Here's what encouragement is. You're putting in courage to somebody else. So is your community putting in courage to you? Are they helping you find confidence rooted in fear of the Lord? And if they're not, I may suggest making a change. Fun thing we're doing this week, we're launching our spring semester of small groups. Small groups are an awesome way to find community and discipleship. I would really encourage you to find a small group, to join a small group. You'll be inspired by people in your faith. You'll be challenged. You're going to ask questions. All of our groups are rooted in the Sunday messages, so you kind of dive deep into those. We've got groups meeting all over the place. You can find out more later on in this service. You may find friends, might even find a little bit something more. I don't know. I've heard relationships have come out of small groups. I'm no dating app, but that's just what I heard. Godly community brings confidence and encouragement. Now, these 3 kings, they also had different types of fear when it came to their position. Saul always feared losing his position. So he walked around with eyes in the back of his head. He couldn't trust anybody. That's no way to live. Absalom feared never getting to that position. He thought his dad would make one of his other sons kings, and so he started trusting the wrong people. But David feared the Lord, and therefore he always knew his position. Where are you looking for confidence today? I want to show just a few different graphics about the different types of mindset that we have. And I want you to ask yourself, which type of mindset am I living with today? The first mindset is a Western type of mindset. Here's what it looks like. Number 1, whenever we get asked a question, or if we're looking for confidence or we're looking to make that next step in our life, our Western mindset And everything in our culture, this would be America, right? It tells us to look inward. Find the answers within. Trust yourself. You do you. It's all about inside here. And then after you kind of feel a little bit of peace, you go outward. And that's when you go to your friends, your family, your community, people that are in your circle. And then finally, you go upward. God, what do you think about this? If you believe in a God. Now, there's another type of mindset, and this is more prevalent in Eastern societies where family is kind of more of a staple of life. In fact, my friend is from Korea, and he said oftentimes in Korea, people will live with their families up into their 30s. And so it's a much more family and community type of mindset in the East. And here's what they do oftentimes. They look outward first. If there's a big decision, there's a type of confidence to be found, people look outward. What do you guys all think about this? And then they look inward. Does this resonate with myself? And then they look upward. Sometimes to one God, sometimes to many gods. There's a third type of mindset, and this is what I want to encourage us to jump into if we're not already there. This is called the fear of the Lord mindset, and here's what it does. Just a moment. The tension is building. Oh, is there a third graphic on there? Oh, bummer. There's no third graphic. Well, what that graphic would show you, is first and foremost, you go to the Lord. So there's a number one arrow pointing up to the Lord. And then number two is a simultaneous going to your community and looking within. So it's first going to God and saying, Lord, what do you think about this? In prayer and worship in the scriptures, you go to God. Show me the way. Where do I find confidence in this situation? And then simultaneously, you go to your community and yourself. You say, search my heart, oh God. Search my heart, oh God. I opened up today talking about my fear of heights, and this is something I didn't want to pass on to my kids. Nora and Moses, you probably heard them as you were walking in today. Nora, my 7-year-old, she's not afraid of heights. In fact, I don't think she's afraid of anything. Kind of scares me sometimes. But I want to show a picture up here of me tossing her high into the air. This is a game we called Up Daddy. And she's about 2 years old. We're at Rehoboth Beach here. And from the very beginning, we have taught Nora to be fearless. In fact, I've prayed ever since we found out that Sarah was pregnant with Nora. I prayed this prayer. God, give her the strength and courage of Samson. Sometimes I regret that prayer. If you've met Nora, you can see that those prayers are still being answered today. A while back, I showed some friends in Washington, D.C. this picture, and my assistant at the time, her name was Diana, people were coming up to Diana and saying, hey, aren't you afraid that when Kurtis does that, he's going to drop her? And she said, no, I'm never afraid. And this person said, why not? And without batting an eye, she said, because he's her dad. He's her dad. He won't drop her. Side note, I never have, by the way. Listen to me this morning. Your Father has you safe in his arms. He won't drop you. He won't let you down. You can be secure, confident, and sure in the fear of the Lord.
Hey, Pastor Kurtis here, and I want to thank you for watching the Bridges Talk from this week. If you made a decision to follow after Jesus, I want you to email us, info@bridgesnashville.com. We're going to send you some resources, and if you're here in the Nashville area, I'd love to grab coffee with you and talk about what it looks like to be a disciple of Christ. If you are also in the Nashville area, I'd like to invite you to join us on Sundays at 10 a.m. when we meet here at the Listening Room Cafe. You can find out more about Bridges on our website, bridgesnashville.com. You can learn about joining the Serve team, local missions, and just supporting through your generosity. It all makes a difference. Can't wait to see you here and hear about what God is doing in and through your life. God bless.